everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I can't hear the feedback very well. Confession, I feel a little bit like a nerd. I typically carry around this timer. It's a bad habit of myself since high school debate. And so, unfortunately, my wife's not here to tell me to shut up, so I'm glad there's a timer on here at 30 minutes so that I can handle a lot of this ourselves. Thank you again for coming out this morning. I want to take a second to also thank everybody that's also live streaming on YouTube with us. My name is Young Pham, and I'm the CEO of Finite Business Solutions. All right, that was embarrassing. Let me start this over. My name is Young Pham, and I'm the CEO of Finite Business Solutions. Really quickly about our organization, we're actually 3 different brands. Finite Business Solutions is an outsourcing entity for all of your back office accounting and finance needs. But what's really exciting about what we do is we do all of your accounting, all your admin, and your back end work. But after we do that, we try to help develop and foster future growth with your company by looking at different analytics and different tools that we're able to aggregate by doing that. The same thing with Finite Files. Today, Finite Files is something that helps out in the HOA space, the homeowners association space with document storage, but our goal down the road is to be able to help use that for all of our other clients that are participating. And then lastly, our third brand is Archer, which is a data aggregation analytics firm that basically helps the Finite and Finite Files to kind of hone in on all the information that we have. So with that in mind, a little bit of background about myself. I was actually born in Saigon, Vietnam. My mother, my aunt, and myself migrated to the United States in 1984 as political refugees. We actually spent a year in Indonesia in a refugee camp before we came here. And it's funny when you look back now, after all these years in the professional sector, how much of those different experiences that we had, even though I grew up here since I was 2 years old, no different than any other kid, but my experiences are vastly different just because culturally how my parents raised me and how I saw their day-to-day activities. I've spent about 25 years in the accounting and finance sector at this point. So in a lot of industries, that's not a whole lot of time, but we've been able to kind of segregate out different things over the years, between the automotive industry, the HOA, the real estate space. Nothing really impressive to the educational background, but from an accounting, finance, business, and psychology background, I was able to utilize all those different separate tools to kind of really see what we have out there today. So with that in mind, now that we got all that pleasantries out of the way, let's kind of talk about what we're really dealing with today in this topic. And I think it's something that vastly affects a lot of us, right? We are now dealing with a 3.5% unemployment rate, which is something to brag about when you talk about it from a financial and a governmental perspective. But when you look at what's going on in the market and you look at the fact that over the last 12, 13 months, this theme of a great resignation has come up, we have to kind of go back and analyze our business models to see how we got to where we're at and how it's actually quite a disadvantage to where we're at today, right? So there's 3 charts on here that I want to show you guys real quickly. You guys don't need to really go over too much of the mundane details of it, but what you'll see here is according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, there's 2 spikes over the last 20 years over the unemployment rate. One is pretty recognizable. That had to do with the 2008, 2009 recession, and the second one was a slight spike in COVID, right, around 2020, 2021. So just kind of keep that in your mind whenever we start talking about this. The second chart has to do with the COVID unemployment cycle. One thing that the first chart doesn't tell you is over an annual basis, we see a spike 3 months into the COVID analysis where we almost spiked to 14% unemployment rate. And then somehow it petered back till basically in February of this year, we're back to 3.5%. The important thing of this chart, as we compare this to the 2008 recession, most economists look at a lot of these charts to kind of tell you whether or not, at what point do we have economic recovery. There's a very straight line that you can draw between a recession and unemployment rates. Typically, it starts off low, and once it spikes up and it cycles back down to where it was before, that's the end of the cycle. So what you'll see during the COVID thing that's very unique, unlike anything else we've seen in the last 100 years, is this unemployment cycle actually figured itself out in about 2 years. If you go back to 2008, it took us over 7.5 years to stabilize our unemployment rate, right? So, fancy charts aside, what does this tell you? Well, let's look at some key standpoints here. The first thing is the highest unemployment rate that we've seen on record was in 1933 during the Great Depression, which is almost at 25% unemployment rate. What most economists will tell you is that 5% is a good baseline for what your unemployment rate should look like in the United States. Now, why is that? Because typically at 5%, what most economists have been able to tell you is that the economy is running right almost at full capacity, which is what you always want to do. The same thing with your business. You don't want to be overstaffed and you don't want to be understaffed. You want to be slightly overstaffed, right? So a 5% baseline is something I want you guys to take away from these three charts today as we look at that. What we're noticing anytime that the unemployment rate dips under 5%, the economy has become too inefficient. And that kind of leads to now more issues with inflation, which is the highest inflation we've seen in the last 40 years. We're now also talking about the Fed constantly increasing the rate to try to hedge against some of this, right? So let's talk about the Great Resignation. I'm sure you guys have been reading a lot about this in the media over the last 12 to 13 months about the Great Resignation. Well, when we started going down this path to talk about this, it was something that very much piqued our interest. So we haven't really started collecting this data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics since 2020. Since 2000. So it's only been about 22 years of data. What the Great Resignation is serving to do is to look at the rate every month of how many people quit their jobs. So according to this data, about 3% of people last year quit their jobs on a monthly basis, roughly 4 million workers. That doesn't seem like a large amount of people in the labor force. But when you think about the fact that the prior year, that's a 20% increase, and the fact that on average over the last 22 years, we're only at 1.98% of people quitting, something has to give. We now deal with something where we have a very low unemployment rate, which makes the labor market extremely intensive for all of us out there trying to hire. At the same time, people are quitting left and right. Why is that? Well, the Pew Research Center told us in February 2022, after sampling multiple thousands of people that had recently quit their job, and it ironed out to 7 specific things. At the top of the list, pay was too low, no opportunities for improvement, felt disrespected at work. Here's the irony in all this. We didn't need a survey to tell us this. Every single one of us has ever worked for somebody else has experienced every single one of these issues. These are not things that are new. But why is it all of a sudden over the last 2 years people decided to quit their jobs when the last 80 years people stuck by their companies? Well, that's an interesting topic to talk about. That leads us to the evolving mindset of the employees. So an interesting fact is that at any given point in time during the labor force, there's actually 5 generations of people that are in the workplace, right? So we're not going to run through this whole list, but traditionalists, which some people call the silent generation, then you have the baby boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, and Gen Zers, which are very new to the workplace. They've only started entering the workplace in the last 5 to 8 years. But 90% of your work demographic sits in the baby boomers, Gen Xs, and millennials. Well, what did those demographics have to tell you? Let's look at some of the key generational traits. And please forgive me if I offend anybody here, but this is based off of a lot of different studies that have kind of been thrown together to look at different themes, right? So what you'll notice is through the themes here: traditionalists, dependable, loyal; baby boomers, workaholics, competitive. Then there was a shift with the Gen Xers, where we're now looking at skeptical, independent, flexible. The millennials came along. They wanted to be achievement-oriented. They wanted to be more competitive. Well, these traits lead to certain motivations in the workplace. For example, traditionalists typically they want to provide long-term value for the company. Baby boomers, company loyalty. You notice these similar themes. And then at some point in time during the Generation X, it changed. How many of us have heard this work-life balance? It's a statement that is so popular in today's generation, right? And that's because as generations age, they go into executive roles, and now this is a theme that's going on. It's a great theme to have, but you'll notice that was not something that existed 20, 30 years ago in the workplace. One of the biggest key differentiators was the Gen X population taught us was that instead of valuing the company's interest over yourself, you are now valuing the professional interests of yourself over the company, which is a very radical change that a lot of us probably don't even realize occurred over the last 10, 15 years. Then you go into the millennial generation, which everyone loves to complain about, and I know for a fact because I was in the first 2 years of the millennial age, right? The idea now is that people want unique work experiences, and at the same time, they question authority. They question supervision. They question their management. It's not the same workforce that we're dealing with 10, 15 years ago, much less 20, 30 years ago. So our society loves to focus on all of our differences, right? But there's a common thread here with every single one of these generations. And it comes down and it boils down to three things. And I think most of you guys in this room and everyone else across the country probably values all three of these items on some level. The first is pay, right? Obviously, that is something that has to be commensurate to the amount of work that you're willing to put in and your abilities and to be able to live a certain lifestyle that you want to live. But beyond that, what most companies have failed to realize over the last few years is that there's also a sense of purpose that people want to have. At Finite, for example, we don't have a theme of where there's certain people that are more important than others. We don't even like to even use the word levels, executive levels, entry levels. Because the truth of the matter is, every single person in your organization is just as valuable as the next. The only difference is someone get paid more because of the type of jobs that we do and the amount of dedication for certain jobs that it takes. And that's a mental thing that a lot of these new generations are trying to bulk against, right? And then the idea of professionalism. Respect, professionalism. You saw this in the theme in the other slide, right? When we think about this now, one of the things that we have to slowly get out of our heads and brains is this concept that people work for us. People no longer work for us. People work with us. And it's an important distinction, and it's not a fluffy statement that we can put on a bumper sticker and say, but it's the truth. And it's a certain mentality that we have to have now, the way we treat people. We cannot expect people to just be rewarded for having, long-term loyalty and company within a certain company anymore. That's just not the way it works. Nowadays, people have to be incentivized outside of their pay, outside of the parking spot, outside of the corner office. They need to have a sense of purpose. They need to know that what they do matters and that what you give them back as far as feedback and long-term career growth matters as well. So that leads us to this. Well, Young, Trung, T-Rung, however you spell your name, where do we go from here? Now that we know that unemployment rate's 3.5%, right? And there's no really any signs of that going up because we're creating more and more jobs every day, and it's becoming more competitive. And then the workforce has become much more intelligent with what they want out there. What do? Well, there's two basic formats to this. The first thing I want to talk to you guys about is the concept of insourcing versus outsourcing. Insourcing is the old model. Insourcing is the model of you build up your business, you hire people as you go, right? I need an accountant, I hire an accountant, I need a salesperson, and so forth. So under this model, one of the great things about that is the fact that you have complete autonomy and control over both your deliverables, your quality, how you do your processes, your workflows, and things of that nature. Outsourcing, on the other hand, has been something that has started popping up in the late 90s, specifically because of NAFTA, and we complain about it all the time with a lot of these large corporations sending labor and American jobs outside the United States. What we don't realize with outsourcing is we do it every day, right? We don't hire a legal counsel every time we have law issues. Every time you need to have your taxes filed, you don't go hire your own CPA, right? You actually outsource to someone else that is a known professional to do it. And so that's a different kind of mentality in that it's not an idea of insourcing or an idea of outsourcing, but rather a hybrid model. Most of us started our own businesses or worked for an organization with a certain passion, whether that passion is in engineering, in construction, in finance, in tech. Usually those passions don't cross over to accounting, admin, back office, customer service, right? It's different for all walks of life. When you build a business model that can necessitate growth within your team members for things they want to do now and for things they want to do in the future, you're much better off than just having people that you hire to do the things you just don't want to do. And that in and itself is very different. That's one of the reasons why we've been so excited over the years at Finite, is the idea of the fact that we actually like to do the stuff you guys don't want to do, right? That's why we call it the BS, the Finite BS on this. And that's because we will do the BS that you guys don't want to do. And there's many entities out there in the United States that can help partner with you guys to do the same things in your business so you can focus on what you do best, focus on what you were taught to do, and focus on what your passion is to do. The second idea is somewhat controversial, especially because every time I bring this up with my colleagues, they think I'm an idiot. But it's the idea of conscientiously updating our business model. There's 4 main tenets to building a pliable and responsible business model. The first idea, and I'm among some of the great tech minds in our industry at this conference over the next 3 days, but I want to have your companies think of this as being tech forward rather than being tech dependent. And that's a very key distinction. Nowadays, we look across the landscape of business and we realize that a lot of our organizations are so reliant on tech that it dictates how we do business. The automation, the amount of information that we get, how we aggregate data, the list goes on, dictates our business model when it should be the other way around. When tech popped up, when software developers popped up, they did that because they came out as a need for something that we needed. And that's the mindset we need to get back to as an organization and as a business entity. We need to be able to go out there and realize what is something that I need in the tech industry that I don't have now. Instead of just settling and making, based off of what you guys currently have. The second idea I want to bring up is understanding the why behind the processes and questioning inefficient workflows. One of the things that is a very big theme at Finite for us, at every single person that we start off, we tell them for the next 3-4 months, learn the process. If it's 6-7 steps, if it's 25 steps, learn it all the way through. Once you learn it and you know it down, question it. Why does something take 30 minutes to do? Why does it take something 3 hours to do? Maybe it does take 3 hours to do something, to do it correctly and with quality, right? But maybe it doesn't. And that's a mindset that all of us need to start having, is constantly questioning why we do the things we do. Back in my old life, when I had to travel from various branches to branches, kind of looking at inefficiencies within an organization, the thing I hated hearing the most was, well, why do you do it that way? Well, that's because how we've always done it. And unfortunately, that's why you've seen this graveyard of businesses over the last 20 or 30 years, because they just keep doing the same thing over and over again without being pliable, without looking at their business model and adapting appropriately. The third thing I want to talk about is proactively hedging against corrections in your market. What does that really mean? Well, there's 2 basic things that occur. Price gouging, high profit margins. I hear it from a lot of my colleagues all the time. I do a 50% margin. I do a 40% margin. Well, really think about what that means. It's nice to brag about, and it's nice in a short term, the amount of margin that you're doing. Is it sustainable? Because if it's not sustainable, guess what? 2 things occur. The government comes in and regulates that industry, or 2, you open yourself up to new competitors in your market that say, I'll do it at 20% margin. I'll do it at 5% margin. So we have to constantly look at our business model and truly understand, does the margin make sense? This is a very unpopular idea, but one of the things I've always believed in is the concept of getting paid for 15 minutes of work, not for 15 years of experience. I know the vast majority of you guys in here are extremely highly educated. I see it on LinkedIn, I see it on Facebook all the time. Well, you're paying me not because of the 15 minutes of work that I have to do. It's because of 15 years of experience and all this credentials and everything else. But that's specifically the reason why we have so many issues in the price of inflation and the cost of business and everything else today. Right? So if you're looking at something today, you have to reasonably look at your client and go, how much do I need to charge for me to make the margin that I'm comfortable making to be able to get up for work? But at the same time, it's a fair value for what we do. And that's the reason why there's so much of a blur now between professional services and other people that are out there? Where is the value anymore of a CPA out there versus someone at H&R Block? It's become so blurry because we haven't defined specifically what those two bases are. The last thing I want to talk about is adjusting who and how you hire. The late 90s taught us one very significant thing. You don't have to go to an Ivy League school to be a millionaire or billionaire anymore. Hell, you don't even have to graduate college. So the fact of the matter is, we see postings on Indeed and everywhere else about educational requirements. That's fine. Education is important if it's key to what you need to do in your work. But if you're just posting a bachelor's out there as something that is required, but you have no reason for why that bachelor's is there, it's different. If you're in the legal industry, if you're in the accounting industry, there's certain certifications you have to have, and those are certain ones that you have to require. But are you just simply trying to weed out certain types of people because they don't have a degree? I think that's foolhardy. I would promise you this. If you guys close your eyes, if you hire indiscriminately, and actually take the time to not be so lazy during the interview process, and asking the same 4 or 5 questions that are canned responses, running through multiple resumes, getting to know someone on a level where they have a certain skill set for now, but perhaps they have a certain skill set for 2 or 3 years for your company down the road, you're gonna open up your eyes and you're gonna see a wonderful, diversified, unfettered labor force that's very similar to how the United States started, with how eclectic our labor and eclectic our population is. I want to leave you guys with a parting thought. I remember as a young kid being able to read back on JFK's speech regarding us going to space, going to the moon. Well, in 2013, when Finite arose, it became a pledge for what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do things a little bit differently, right? And the statement is very simple. We choose to change how we do business. We choose to change how we do business in this decade. Not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one in which we intend to disrupt. If not us, who? If not now, when? Thank you for your time today, guys. I'd like to open up for any Q&A. You don't like to see my face? I got to kill my marketing team. I look like a total narcissist with my stupid fat face up there. So,
Good morning.
Good morning.
I really enjoyed your presentation. It was really wonderful. I have a question for you. When you spoke about the unemployment rates, how do you feel that unemployment rate is really factual? Because with the government, with COVID, they issued a lot of PPP loans. So small businesses and employers were actually able to retain their staff and retain their employees, therefore minimizing the actual unemployment rate. So how do you feel that is impacting those actual numbers? Because in my opinion, I feel that they're a little bit fluffed.
Sure. And that's actually a pretty interesting point. That's one of the reasons why, if we went back to the first slide, we actually look at unemployment rates over an annual basis, and it usually evens itself out whenever we analyze the data on something like that. When you're dealing with the spikes, you notice in the curve for COVID, there it went up to 14%, right? But by the time we were done by the end of the year, it was back down to about 5-6%. Right. So I believe that over enough time, there was enough data to support kind of like what the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics was telling us is accurate on that. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
I'm coming. Sorry.
Wow. I can do it without it. Thank you. Okay, so I actually have 2. And in my company, I am pretty much over the hiring process. So the first question that I have for you is, you made a really good point with today's generation and how everything's operating. You have to begin to incentivize your employees outside of their pay. So just wanted to know, in your experience with your company, do you have any suggestions of incentives that we can utilize? Because what I've noticed is that with the generations that we're hiring now, I don't want to say lazy, but there is no drive to like put forth their best effort. They're like, I come here, I leave, and that is what it is. So with that being said, some of the older employees that we have, like they're like, I want to put forth the best work that I could possibly do. So with that evolving based upon how you had the different tiers of baby boomers and Gen X's and stuff, could you give examples of some incentives that we could possibly consider? And then the second part was, you kind of hit home. First of all, I enjoyed your presentation. Thank you very much. You kind of hit home to me because we do have systems in place that are working, which is allowing our company to be successful. Is there a time to say it's time to rethink that system, especially if it's working? I know they were both very loaded questions, but
No, it's fine. Let me answer the first one. I may have you repeat the second one. I have a terrible memory with stuff. But no, I think it's interesting. I think one of the first things we need to do, and keep in mind, I come from a corporate America background, before we ventured out and started our own thing, where, you would have your redundant annual raises, and it was like a merit increase that was like 1 or 2% or something like that. I think the first thing we need to get away from as companies is giving people raises that piss people off, right? If someone's making $15, $20 an hour and you give them a 12, 13 cent raise, why are you giving people money and then they're going to be mad at you?
Right.
That doesn't make any sense, right? I think annual reviews are very important, right? I think at least at a bare minimum, we have to formalize 2 different touch points. And that's outside of us talking to each other on a daily, monthly, basis, giving each other feedback. Something we did that was a little bit unique at our organization was this. Instead of giving people Christmas bonuses, we decided to give employees Christmas gifts, holiday gifts. Right? Because we wanted something that had a theme to it. Like, for example, one year we did headphones, another year we did something else, and there was always a theme of listening or stress or something involved with it. Then what we did was in around Lunar New Year, because I'm Vietnamese, my background, I thought it'd be fun to do the actual annual profit sharing bonus around February. And at that time, we sit down with every single one of our employees, and we go through a rating system based off of what you can earn as your total pool, right? So you sit down and you go, okay, here's my profit. Every employee can have up to 5% of their pay or 6% of their pay or something like that. But talk to them about why they're getting the money, right? We need to get away from this whole idea of just giving somebody money and then having awkward conversations about pay. That needs to go away, right? There's so many people in the labor force, the poor teammates that we hire, they're so awkward about talking about things like that. But the main thing is people need to know the why now. That generation that you're speaking with, which is a little lackadaisical, and the truth is they care more about job security than possibly anything else. The data on the Gen Zers is still very limited at this point because they've only been in the labor force about 5 to 8 years. But that generation is very interesting because they saw their parents go through the '08 recession. So unlike millennials that are very, after 6 months, I want your job, right? Gen Zers typically want more stability in an organization. So they're looking at, do I have a company that's been around a while? Is there childcare? Is there a ability for me to get a mortgage? Things of that nature. So that's where it's very different. I would say we can't have our directors, our supervisors, our hiring practices run through the motion of employee reviews. Right? We need to sit down with every single one of them and have a profile, right? And we forget this all the time. The only time we look at an employee resume is at the very beginning when we're trying to hire someone. And then we completely forget what their background is. Well, what if their background in digital media or something else benefits you later down the road, and it benefits them down the road as well? You build out a proper profile, you build out a proper path, right? I'm hiring you at $45, $30,000. You want to get to 100. Let's put you on a path to do that. I'm not promising you that you're going to do that, but at the same time, let's work together on that, right? Let's have honest conversations about things like that. And I think people will appreciate that more and more.
Thank you. Second part was I'm a analytical person, and so we have systems in place that work. And so if it works, it's like, okay, why change it? So you did mention that, have them come on and, hey, this is a system, and then begin to question it. My question was, if the system is actually working, when do you go back to revisit to say, okay, let's make some changes if it's working?
I would say you don't. I would say you don't. I mean, you shouldn't make change just to make change. But at the same time, if you're collecting the proper data, if you're getting exit interviews when people leave, and you're getting proper performance reviews from all your team members, at that point, you'll know when you need to shift your mindset and how you treat people. Hell, even ask, we do it every year. It's like, what do you guys think of, the gift this year? What do you guys think about the holiday party, right? Do you want to do something in the middle of the year? Like just have the, and I get it. We are a small organization, so it's easy for us to intimately get to know our employees, but we like to keep it that way. And at some point, no matter how large of an organization you are, there is an intimate 20 or 30 people that is a group. But is that supervisor, is that director willing to go that step to know their team on that level? So, thank you so much.
My bosses are in the room. Can you go over that part about how we need bigger raises again?
I'm sorry?
My bosses are in the room. Can you go over that part about the bigger raises again?
I agree. Thank you again, guys. I appreciate the time today.